August 10th, 1944. Dawn broke over the rolling farmland of northern France, painting the war-torn countryside in hues of amber and gold. Second Lieutenant Joseph Wilson of the 761st Tank Battalion hunched in the commander's seat of his Sherman tank, scanning the distant tree line through his binoculars. The morning mist lingered in patches across the field, and the Germans were out there waiting. Wilson and his crew believed this would be a routine reconnaissance mission, another day of cautious advancement through recently liberated territory. They had no idea they were about to encounter an enemy force that would change the course of their war forever. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the extraordinary account of how a young man from rural Alabama would shatter German expectations of American tank crews and become one of the most effective, yet least recognized, tank commanders of the European theater, demonstrating that courage, ingenuity, and determination could overcome seemingly insurmountable technological disadvantages on the battlefield. Leonard Jackson had never imagined himself as a soldier, let alone a tank commander. Born in 1922 on a small farm outside Tuskegee, Alabama, he spent his childhood rising before dawn to help his father tend their modest cotton fields. The third of 7 children, Leonard understood responsibility from an early age. His mother, Eliza, had taught all her children to read using a worn Bible and whatever newspapers they could obtain, instilling in them a thirst for knowledge despite limited formal education. "Never let anyone tell you what you can't learn," she would say, holding young Leonard's hand as they traced letters together by lamplight. "Your mind belongs to you and nobody else." By age 16, Leonard could disassemble and repair nearly any machine on the farm, from tractors to irrigation pumps. His father called him the engineer, noting how the boy could diagnose mechanical problems by sound alone. This intuitive understanding of machinery would later prove invaluable, though neither father nor son could have predicted how. When Pearl Harbor drew America into the war in December 1941, Leonard was 19 years old. The draft notice arrived 6 months later. Despite the segregated nature of the American military, Leonard viewed service as both a duty and an opportunity. His mother cried the morning he left, pressing his father's pocket watch into his palm. His father, stoic and proud, simply nodded and said, "Show them what you're made of, son." After basic training, Leonard's aptitude tests revealed exceptional mechanical ability and spatial reasoning. The Army, desperately needing skilled tankers for the European campaign, assigned him to the 761st Tank Battalion, one of the few African-American armored units in the segregated military. Training at Camp Hood, Texas, Leonard encountered 2 formidable challenges: the institutional racism that relegated black soldiers to support roles and the mechanical limitations of American tanks themselves. The Sherman tanks they trained on were notoriously outmatched by German Panther and Tiger tanks, with thinner armor and less powerful guns. Captain Thomas Reynolds, the white commander assigned to oversee the 761st's training, initially held low expectations. His daily reports frequently noted inadequate preparation and limited tactical understanding among the men. However, as weeks passed, Leonard's exceptional performance caught his attention. "Private Jackson appears to possess an intuitive understanding of tank operations beyond his training," Reynolds wrote in his evaluation. "He has modified several standard procedures that have demonstrably improved response time and targeting accuracy." What Reynolds observed was Leonard applying principles he had learned on the farm. Where other trainees saw the Sherman as merely a weapon to be operated according to manual specifications, Leonard approached it as a living system, one whose limitations could be compensated for with proper handling and maintenance. "The Sherman ain't perfect," Leonard explained to his crew during a maintenance session, "but neither is a mule, and my daddy could make a stubborn mule outwork any fancy horse if he understood its ways." By April 1944, the 761st Tank Battalion had completed training and received deployment orders for Europe. Leonard, now a sergeant, commanded a crew of 4. Corporal David Williams from Detroit, a former auto factory worker who served as gunner. Private First Class Michael Riley from Boston, the loader. Private Thomas Jenkins from Philadelphia, the radio operator. and Private Robert Martinez from New Mexico, who drove the tank Leonard had named Brown Betty. The unit arrived in England just weeks before D-Day. Though not part of the initial Normandy landings, they were deployed to France in late July 1944, assigned to support General Patton's Third Army during Operation Cobra. By this time, American forces had broken out of the Normandy beachhead and were pushing inland against increasingly determined German resistance. Colonel Harold Montgomery, commanding the 8th Armored Division to which the 761st was temporarily attached, gathered his officers for a briefing on August 9th. Montgomery was a career officer with silver hair and a reputation for straightforwardness. "Gentlemen, intelligence reports indicate elements of the 21st Panzer Division operating in this area," Montgomery said, pointing to a map of the French countryside near the village of Saint-Lô. "Their Panther tanks outgun our Shermans at range. Standard procedure remains the same: maintain numerical superiority and avoid one-on-one engagements whenever possible." The statistics were sobering. A German Panther tank carried a 75mm high-velocity gun capable of penetrating a Sherman's armor at distances over 1,000 yards. By contrast, Sherman tanks needed to close to within 500 yards to have any hope of damaging a Panther's frontal armor with their own 75mm guns. German tanks also featured sloped armor designs that increased effective thickness without adding weight, making frontal penetrations even more difficult. American production capacity had delivered over 40,000 Sherman tanks by this point in the war, compared to fewer than 6,000 Panthers. But on the battlefield, this numerical advantage provided cold comfort to crews facing superior German armor. American tankers had a saying: "It takes 5 Shermans to defeat 1 Panther, 4 to be destroyed, and 1 to get the kill." Captain James Wilson, now commanding Leonard's company, held a separate briefing for his platoon leaders and tank commanders after Montgomery's general session. "We'll conduct reconnaissance in force along this line," Wilson indicated, tracing a path through farmland northeast of Saint-Lô. "Intelligence suggests German armor is repositioning. Our job is to locate and report, not engage unless absolutely necessary." Leonard studied the map carefully, noting the terrain features: a stream cutting through several farms, wooded areas that could conceal enemy positions, and the gentle hills that characterized the Normandy countryside. Something about the pattern of recent German movements caught his attention. "Sir," Leonard spoke up, surprising several officers who were unaccustomed to sergeants, particularly black sergeants, offering tactical observations. "These farm roads all converge at this point here. If I was moving armor under air threat, I'd use these tree lines for cover and set up at this crossroads for maximum field of fire." The room fell silent. Captain Wilson studied the map more closely, then looked at Leonard with newfound respect. "Sergeant Jackson, isn't it? Good observation. We'll approach with that possibility in mind." Dawn broke on August 10th, as 5 Sherman tanks from Leonard's platoon moved cautiously along the designated reconnaissance route. Leonard stood in the commander's hatch of Brown Betty, his head and shoulders exposed as he scanned the terrain. The morning air carried the scent of apple blossoms from nearby orchards, an incongruous sweetness amid the diesel fumes and cordite that had become the persistent odors of war. Through his binoculars, Leonard studied the tree line 500 yards ahead, where tall oaks and elms provided excellent concealment for potential German positions. Behind him, 4 more Shermans advanced in staggered formation, maintaining 50-yard intervals. "Driver, slow advance," Leonard ordered through the intercom. "Gunner, watch that tree line at 2 o'clock. "Watching it, Sarge," Williams replied from below, rotating the turret slightly to track the suspicious area. Leonard felt a familiar tension in his shoulders, the sixth sense he'd developed over months of combat that often warned him of danger before it became visible. Something about the perfect stillness of the tree line troubled him. "All tanks halt," he commanded over the radio. The small column came to a stop, engines idling. Lieutenant Parker, commanding the platoon from the lead tank, called over the radio. "Sergeant Jackson, why are we stopping? Orders are to proceed to Checkpoint Baker." "Sir, requesting permission to deploy smoke and change course. That tree line doesn't look right to me." Parker hesitated, As a newly commissioned officer with less combat experience than Leonard, he had learned to trust the sergeant's instincts. Very well. Deploy smoke and shift to heading 270. As white phosphorus smoke rounds burst in front of the American column, Leonard directed his driver to turn west, away from their original path. The other Shermans followed, using the smokescreen for cover. The decision saved their lives. Seconds later, the distinctive crack of a high-velocity 75mm gun shattered the morning calm. A German armor-piercing shell streaked through the spot where Leonard's tank would have been, had they continued on their original course. "Panther, 9 o'clock in the tree line." Leonard shouted, "Driver, reverse! Get behind that farmhouse!" Brown Betty lurched backward as Martinez expertly maneuvered the 33-ton vehicle behind a stone farmhouse. 2 more German shells impacted nearby, sending dirt and debris skyward. Over the radio, Leonard heard the panic in Lieutenant Parker's voice. "All tanks, evasive action." "We have at least 3 Panthers in the tree line." Leonard quickly assessed their situation. The German tanks held a perfect ambush position, overlooking open ground the American tanks would need to cross. A frontal assault would be suicide, yet retreat would leave the adjacent infantry companies vulnerable to a German armored thrust. In that moment, Leonard made a decision that contradicted conventional tactical doctrine, but drew upon his intimate understanding of the land from his farming background. "Lieutenant," Leonard called over the radio, "request permission to flank east along the streambed. It runs behind their position." "Negative, Sergeant," Parker replied. "The streambed is too narrow for tanks." "Sir, it's wide enough if we shed some track. I grew up driving tractors through worse." A tense silence followed. Finally, Parker responded, "Very well, Sergeant Jackson. Take your tank. We'll provide covering fire." "Williams," Leonard addressed his gunner, "fire 3 rounds at the tree line. Aim for the muzzle flashes. Martinez, when he starts firing, you take us east to that streambed at full speed." Williams acknowledged and began firing at the German positions, while the other Sherman tanks added their firepower to the suppressive barrage. Under this covering fire, Martinez gunned the engine, and Brown Betty shot eastward toward the shallow stream that cut through the battlefield. Reaching the water, Martinez guided the Sherman into the streambed. The tank's tracks dug into the soft earth of the banks as it descended, water spraying up around them as they followed the natural channel. It was a desperate gamble. If they became stuck, they would be helplessly exposed. Leonard ordered his crew to shed excess equipment, lightening the tank as much as possible. They tossed out ammunition crates and personal gear, gaining precious mobility. The Sherman groaned and slipped repeatedly, but continued moving through the streambed, gradually working its way behind the German positions. After 15 agonizing minutes, Leonard spotted the rear of a Panther tank through the trees, its crew entirely focused on the American tanks to their front. From this position, the German tank's more vulnerable rear armor was exposed. "Driver, halt," Leonard ordered quietly. "Gunner, Panther at 2 o'clock, 100 yards, AP round." Williams swung the turret smoothly, aligning the 75mm gun on the unsuspecting German tank. Target acquired. "Fire!" The Sherman's gun roared. At such close range, the armor-piercing shell easily penetrated the Panther's thinner rear armor. The German tank shuddered as the shell found its mark, and seconds later, flames erupted from its engine compartment. Before the Germans could comprehend what was happening, Leonard had ordered his tank forward, seeking the next target. A second Panther, responding to the destruction of its companion, began rotating its turret. But Leonard's crew was faster. Williams fired again, striking the German tank's turret ring and jamming it in position. Lieutenant Parker, hearing the unexpected gunfire from the German flank, seized the opportunity. "All tanks, advance!" he ordered. The American Sherman surged forward, catching the remaining German tanks in a crossfire. Within minutes, the brief but intense engagement ended with 3 Panthers defeated and the remainder of the German force retreating. As the smoke cleared, Captain Wilson arrived with reinforcements, surveying the scene with astonishment. 3 of Germany's fearsome Panthers lay disabled, one burning, one with its turret askew, and one abandoned by its crew. And there was Leonard, calmly directing his tank out of the streambed, mud and water cascading from its hull. "Sergeant Jackson," Captain Wilson approached him, "how in God's name did you manage this?" Leonard climbed down from his tank, exhaustion evident on his face despite his composed demeanor. "Just applied some farm sense to the problem, sir. Panthers are powerful machines, but they've got their blind spots, just like everything else." News of the engagement spread quickly through the American lines. General Patton himself, visiting the sector 2 days later, requested to meet the tank commander responsible for the innovative tactic. Upon learning that Leonard was black, some staff officers suggested a more presentable tank commander be introduced instead. Patton, however, would have none of it. "I don't give a damn if he's purple," Patton reportedly said. "I want to meet the man who outfoxed those Panthers." The meeting was brief but consequential. Patton, resplendent in his polished helmet and ivory-handled pistols, listened intently as Leonard explained his reasoning during the battle. "Sir, the Germans rely on technical superiority and textbook positions, but growing up farming you learn that sometimes the path through the mud is better than the path around it." Patton smiled, a rare expression for the stern general. "Sergeant Jackson, that's the kind of American ingenuity that will win this war. Keep it up." He pinned a silver star to Leonard's uniform on the spot. The encounter marked a turning point. Captain Wilson, recognizing Leonard's tactical acumen, began consulting him during planning sessions. Though officially Leonard couldn't attend officers' briefings due to segregation policies, Wilson would often seek him out afterward, valuing his perspective. By late August, Leonard had established a training program for other Sherman crews, teaching them his techniques for maximizing the tank's strengths while minimizing its vulnerabilities. His central philosophy was simple but revolutionary. Don't fight the Panther where it's strong. Create a battlefield where our advantages matter more than theirs. Leonard's methods emphasized mobility over firepower, using terrain features to negate the Panther's superior range and frontal armor. He taught crews to identify weak points in German tank design, particularly their vulnerable engine compartments and less protected side armor. Most importantly, he instilled confidence, showing that American tankers need not fear German armor if they fought intelligently. "The Germans think a Sherman is inferior because it can't win a head-on shooting match," Leonard explained during one training session. "But a tank battle isn't a duel. It's more like wrestling. Position and leverage matter more than raw strength." As Operation Cobra progressed and American forces pushed eastward, Leonard's reputation grew. The Germans, noting the changing tactics of American armor, began referring to a particular Sherman that seemed to appear unexpectedly behind their positions as Der Geist, the Ghost. What the Germans couldn't know was that Leonard's understanding of machinery extended beyond tactical employment. Each night he worked with his crew to modify their Sherman, making subtle adjustments to the engine timing for better acceleration, reworking the turret hydraulics for faster rotation, and reinforcing vulnerable points with salvaged armor plates. One particular modification proved especially valuable. Leonard noticed that German tank commanders relied heavily on the distinctive profile of the Sherman for identification. By welding additional storage boxes to alter his tank's silhouette and applying an unorthodox camouflage pattern based on the dappled sunlight he remembered from hunting in Alabama forests, he made Brown Betty harder to recognize at a distance. The true test of Leonard's methods came in early September during the Allied push toward the German border. Intelligence reported elements of the 2nd SS Panzer Division attempting to establish defensive positions along a strategic ridgeline near the Belgian border. The American command decided to launch a preemptive strike, with Leonard's company assigned to the vanguard. Captain Wilson gathered his tank commanders the evening before the operation. Maps spread across the hood of a jeep showed the expected German positions along a heavily wooded ridge, overlooking a series of open fields, ideal defensive terrain for the German tanks. "Conventional wisdom says we need at least 5-to-1 numerical superiority to take that position," Wilson explained grimly. "We'll have 3-to-1 at best." Leonard studied the map silently, noting the network of irrigation ditches cutting through the fields, too narrow for tanks according to doctrine, but potentially navigable using his techniques. "Sir," Leonard spoke up, "what if we don't attack where they expect us to?" Wilson raised an eyebrow. "Go on, Sergeant." Leonard pointed to the irrigation network. "These ditches converge behind the German right flank. If a small force used them to get position on their rear, While the main force demonstrated to their front, we could create enough confusion to break their line. The plan was audacious, even reckless by standard tactical assessment. But Wilson had learned to trust Leonard's unconventional thinking. It would be a night operation, Wilson mused. 3 tanks at most could attempt it without detection. Brown Betty can lead them, Leonard said simply. That night, under a moonless sky, Leonard led 2 other Sherman tanks toward the German positions. Their engines muffled as much as possible, lights extinguished. They advanced slowly along the irrigation ditches, 33-ton machines moving with improbable stealth. Private Martinez, now promoted to corporal for his exceptional driving skill, guided Brown Betty through passages barely wider than the tank itself. Twice they nearly became stuck, the tracks slipping in the wet earth of the ditch walls. Each time, Leonard's calm direction enabled them to continue. By 3 in the morning, they had reached their position behind the German right flank, less than 200 yards from the nearest Panther tanks. Through his night vision scope, another unofficial modification, Leonard observed German tank crews sleeping near their vehicles, confidence in their defensive position evident in their relaxed security. "Hold position and maintain radio silence," Leonard instructed the other tank commanders. "We wait for the main force to initiate contact." The hours passed with excruciating slowness. Leonard's crew remained at battle stations, too tense for conversation. As dawn approached, the distant rumble of engines announced the arrival of the American main force on the opposite side of the ridge. German activity instantly increased. Panther crews scrambled to their tanks, engines roaring to life as they prepared to meet the expected frontal assault. None looked behind them, where 3 Sherman tanks now sat in perfect firing position. At precisely 0600 hours, the American artillery opened up, shells impacting along the German front. Under this covering fire, the main American tank force began their advance across the open ground, a seemingly conventional and predictable attack. Leonard waited until the German tanks were fully engaged to their front before giving the order. "All tanks, open fire. Target engine compartments and rear turrets." 3 Sherman guns fired simultaneously, the reports blending with the general battlefield cacophony. 3 German tanks were hit before they realized they were under attack from behind. Confusion spread through the German lines as commanders tried to understand how American tanks had appeared in their rear. In the chaos that followed, Leonard's small force wreaked havoc. Brown Betty alone accounted for 4 Panther tanks in the first 10 minutes of the engagement, firing and repositioning with a fluidity that made it seem like multiple tanks were attacking. When German infantry attempted to respond to the threat, Leonard used his tank's machine guns to pin them down, allowing the other Shermans to continue targeting the heavier vehicles. The remaining German tanks faced an impossible dilemma: turn to engage the threat to their rear and expose their vulnerable sides to the main American force, or continue facing forward and be destroyed from behind. By mid-morning, the German position had collapsed. 17 Panther tanks lay disabled or abandoned across the battlefield, with American casualties far lighter than expected. Brown Betty, despite taking several glancing hits, remained operational. As American forces secured the ridge, Major General Maxwell approached the command group, where Captain Wilson was debriefing his tank commanders. The general's expression reflected both amazement and satisfaction. "Captain Wilson," he said, "7th Corps HQ is calling this the most successful armored action since Normandy. Your company destroyed or disabled 17 German tanks while losing only 4 of your own. How do you explain that?" Wilson didn't hesitate. "Sir, allow me to introduce Sergeant Leonard Jackson. This victory belongs to him and his crew." Leonard stood at attention as the general approached him. For a moment, Maxwell seemed surprised to see a black soldier being credited with the tactical success, but his military professionalism quickly reasserted itself. "Sergeant Jackson," the general said, "I've been in this man's army for 25 years, and I've never seen a more effective use of armored assets. Consider yourself promoted to 2nd lieutenant, effective immediately." Leonard blinked in surprise. Field promotions for black soldiers to commissioned officer rank were virtually unheard of. "Thank you, sir," he managed to say. "Don't thank me," Maxwell replied. "Just keep defeating German armor. We need more men who can think like you do." The promotion was more than symbolic. As an officer, Leonard gained greater authority to implement his tactics across multiple tank platoons. The 761st Tank Battalion began compiling a remarkable record of successes against German armor, achieving victory ratios that defied statistical probability. German intelligence reports from this period revealed growing concern about changing American tactics. One assessment, later captured in an intelligence officer's diary, read, "American Sherman tanks are now being employed in a manner that neutralizes our technical advantages. They avoid frontal engagements, exploit weaknesses in our deployment patterns, and demonstrate an uncanny ability to appear where least expected." Most concerning is a particular unit that has destroyed an estimated 22 of our tanks over the past month, with minimal losses. Our crews now report a reluctance to engage when this unit is believed to be in the sector. What the German intelligence officer couldn't know was that the unit they feared was often just Brown Betty and its remarkable crew, employing Leonard's innovative tactics. By October 1944, Leonard's reputation had spread throughout the European theater. General Omar Bradley requested a detailed report on his methods, which were subsequently distributed as a tactical supplement to armored units across the front. Yet even as his professional status rose, Leonard continued to face the realities of serving in a segregated military. When his tank company was granted leave in recently liberated Paris, he and other black soldiers were directed to separate facilities. The French civilians, however, made no such distinctions, treating all American liberators with equal gratitude. During this brief respite from combat, Leonard wrote home for the first time in months, "Dear Mama and Papa, I hope this letter finds you well. I cannot say much about where I am or what I'm doing because of censorship rules, but I want you to know that all those hours fixing tractors and plows were not wasted. It turns out farming teaches a man everything he needs to know about machines and land, even here in Europe. The army has made me an officer now. I wish you could see it, your son with gold bars on his shoulders. Some men still look sideways at me because of the color of my skin, but out here where it matters, I've found that courage and skill speak louder than prejudice. Give my love to everyone at home. I carry Papa's pocket watch with me everywhere. It keeps perfect time, just like he always said it would. Your loving son, Leonard, now Lieutenant Jackson." As the Allied forces prepared for what would become the final push into Germany, Leonard faced his greatest challenge yet. Intelligence reported elements of the 12th SS Panzer Division, equipped with the fearsome Tiger tanks, establishing defensive positions in the Ardennes forest. These Tigers, with their 88mm guns and exceptionally thick armor, could destroy a Sherman tank from over 2,000 yards, a range at which American guns were essentially ineffective. The briefing room fell silent as Colonel Montgomery outlined the upcoming operation. Outside, a December snowfall blanketed the small Belgian village where the 761st Tank Battalion had established their temporary headquarters. Maps covering the walls displayed the precarious Allied position following the surprise German counter-offensive that would later be known as the Battle of the Bulge. "Gentlemen," Montgomery began, his voice grave, "the situation is critical. German armored spearheads have broken through our lines in multiple sectors. The 101st Airborne is surrounded at Bastogne. Our mission is to help establish a blocking position here," he indicated a forested area near the town of Saint-Vith, "to prevent further German advances toward the Meuse River." Leonard studied the tactical map with growing concern. Intelligence reports indicated that the German force included elements of the 2nd Panzer Division, equipped with both Panther and Tiger tanks. These Tigers represented the pinnacle of German armor, 70-ton behemoths armed with the devastating 88mm gun and protected by armor up to 100mm thick. "Intelligence estimates at least 15 Tigers in this battle group," Montgomery continued. "They're being supported by 20 to 30 Panthers and mechanized infantry. We'll be reinforcing elements of the 7th Armored Division already engaged in the area." Captain Wilson, now promoted to Major, spoke up. "Sir, what air support can we expect?" Montgomery shook his head grimly. "This weather is grounding our aircraft. We're on our own for at least the next 72 hours. The implications were clear to everyone in the room. Without air support, American armor would be fighting German tanks on their terms, precisely the situation American doctrines sought to avoid. The heavy German tanks excelled in defensive positions and poor weather, where their superior firepower and armor could be maximized. As the briefing concluded, Leonard found himself deep in thought. His promotion to second lieutenant had given him command of a platoon of 5 Sherman tanks, including his own Brown Betty. The challenge ahead would test everything he had learned about facing superior German armor. Major Wilson approached him as officers filed out of the briefing room. "Your thoughts, Lieutenant Jackson?" Leonard chose his words carefully. The conventional approach would be to maintain defensive positions and attempt to delay the German advance until weather clears for air support, but that plays to their strengths. Wilson nodded. "Go on." "The Tigers have one significant weakness: their mobility. In this snow and these forests, they're restricted to roads and open areas. Their fuel consumption is also extreme, especially in cold weather." Leonard pointed to the map. "These forest trails here and here are too narrow for Tigers, possibly even for Panthers, but our Shermans could manage them, especially with modified tracks for snow." Wilson raised an eyebrow. "You're suggesting we move through the forest parallel to their advance and strike their supply lines?" "Yes, sir. The Tigers are formidable, but they're useless without fuel and ammunition. Cut their logistics and we negate their combat power." The plan was audacious. Rather than engaging the German armor directly, Leonard proposed sending his platoon through seemingly impassable forest trails to emerge behind the German advance. There they would target fuel trucks, ammunition carriers, and other support vehicles. Without these vital supplies, the German armored spearhead would grind to a halt. Wilson considered the idea. "It's risky, Lieutenant. If your platoon is discovered in those woods without support, you'd be cut off with no easy extraction route." "With respect, sir, it's less risky than facing those Tigers head-on," Leonard replied, "and my crew has experience operating independently." After a moment's thought, Wilson nodded. "Very well. Select your best crews and prepare your tanks for forest operations. You move out at 2300 hours. That evening, Leonard gathered his platoon. In addition to Brown Betty, now upgraded with extended grouses for better traction in snow, he had 4 other Sherman tanks under his command. Each was crewed by men he had personally trained in his tactics. "This mission requires absolute stealth and precision," Leonard explained, showing them the route through the dense Ardennes forest. "We'll be moving at night with minimal lights. The forest trails are narrow and treacherous, but passable if we're careful. Once behind German lines, we target fuel trucks, ammunition carriers, and command vehicles only. Avoid engaging tanks unless absolutely necessary." Sergeant Williams, Leonard's longtime gunner and now a tank commander himself, asked the question on everyone's mind. "What if we encounter Tigers?" Leonard's expression remained calm. "We avoid them if possible. If engagement is unavoidable, we use our mobility advantages. No frontal engagements under any circumstances. Target tracks, rear engine compartments, or turret rings only. And remember, a Tiger without fuel is just a steel bunker that can't reposition." As the briefing concluded, Leonard spent time with each crew, addressing concerns and ensuring they understood their roles. The men's trust in him was evident, even among the newer replacements who knew him only by reputation. Private James Cooper, a recent addition serving as a loader on one of the Shermans, approached Leonard hesitantly. "Lieutenant, is it true you've personally accounted for 22 German tanks?" Leonard smiled slightly. "I don't keep count, Private, and no tank commander succeeds alone. It's always a crew effort." Cooper persisted. "But sir, the Germans call you der Schwarze Geist, the Black Ghost. They say you appear out of nowhere and vanish just as quickly." "The Germans say a lot of things, Cooper," Leonard replied, checking his map one final time. "Most of them aren't true. Now get some rest. We move in 4 hours." At precisely 2300 hours, 5 Sherman tanks moved out from the American lines, their engines muffled and running lights extinguished. Leonard led the column in Brown Betty, navigating by starlight and his exceptional night vision. The forest closed around them like a dark cathedral, snow-laden branches creating a tunnel through which the tanks crawled at barely 10 miles per hour. The first challenge came 2 hours into their journey, when they encountered a stream that had not appeared on their maps. The water was shallow but bordered by steep banks made treacherous by ice and snow. Leonard halted the column and dismounted, examining the obstacle personally. The temperature had dropped well below freezing, and his breath formed clouds in the darkness. After careful consideration, he directed the tanks to a crossing point where fallen trees had created a natural bridge structure. "Martinez," he called to his driver over the radio. "Ease forward exactly as I direct you. Left track on the fallen oak, right track on solid ground. Gentle throttle." With Leonard walking alongside, guiding them inch by inch, Brown Betty crossed the stream successfully. The other tanks followed, mimicking the exact path. When the last Sherman had crossed, Leonard checked his compass and map by the dim light of a shielded flashlight. "We're making good time," he informed his platoon commanders. "German lines should be approximately 3 miles ahead. From this point forward, absolute radio silence unless emergency, hand signals only when halted." The forest grew denser as they progressed, forcing the tanks to move in single file along game trails barely wide enough to accommodate them. Branches scraped against the steel hulls, creating unnerving sounds in the darkness. Twice they were forced to stop, while crewmen used handsaws to clear fallen trees that blocked their path. By 3 in the morning, Leonard's navigation had brought them to a vantage point overlooking a narrow country road. Below, German vehicles moved steadily westward. Trucks loaded with ammunition, fuel tankers, and occasionally self-propelled guns or armored personnel carriers. The forest had allowed Leonard's platoon to bypass the main German defensive positions completely. Leonard observed the traffic for nearly 30 minutes, noting patterns and identifying the most valuable targets. When a gap appeared in the convoy, he signaled his platoon to move into pre-designated firing positions along the ridgeline. He entered Brown Betty's turret and addressed his crew. "This is exactly what we trained for. Williams, prioritize fuel trucks and ammunition carriers. Martinez, be ready for immediate repositioning after each engagement. Remember, 3 volleys maximum from any position, then we move." Leonard's strategy was simple but effective. His tanks would fire on the German supply convoy, focusing on high-value targets. They then immediately change positions to avoid counter-battery fire. By striking from multiple angles, they would create the impression of a much larger force. At Leonard's signal, 5 Sherman tanks opened fire simultaneously. The effect was devastating. 3 fuel trucks erupted in flames, and an ammunition carrier detonated in a spectacular secondary explosion that illuminated the entire valley. German infantry scrambled for cover as American machine guns swept the road. True to their training, the Sherman crews immediately repositioned after the initial volley. They moved rapidly to alternate firing positions, using the forest for concealment. When they opened fire again 2 minutes later, it was from a completely different angle, creating confusion among the Germans below. The third volley targeted a group of command vehicles that had stopped to assess the situation. With surgical precision, Williams placed a high-explosive round into what appeared to be a command car, effectively decapitating the local German leadership. "All tanks reposition to secondary rally point," Leonard ordered, as German mortars began firing blindly into the forest. The Sherman tanks withdrew deeper into the woods, using routes Leonard had identified during their approach. By dawn, Leonard's platoon had relocated to a position 4 miles south, where they observed another German supply route. Throughout the day, they repeated their hit-and-run tactics, striking German logistics columns and disappearing before effective countermeasures could be organized. German response grew increasingly desperate. Reconnaissance planes flew low over the forest, searching for the elusive American tanks. Patrols of infantry and light vehicles probed the woods, but found nothing. Meanwhile, reports reached German headquarters of American tanks appearing suddenly, striking with devastating effect, and vanishing like ghosts. An intercepted German radio transmission, later translated by American intelligence, captured their growing frustration. Oberst Müller demands immediate air support to locate American tank unit operating behind our lines, at least a company strength, possibly more. They're targeting our fuel reserves and ammunition. The 17th Panzer Regiment is already reporting fuel shortages. If these raids continue, the advance cannot be sustained. What the Germans couldn't comprehend was that the company strength they feared was merely 5 Sherman tanks operating with extraordinary discipline and tactical innovation. By the third day, the effects of Leonard's operation became evident across the broader front. German tank advances slowed noticeably, with multiple reports of Panthers and Tigers abandoned due to fuel exhaustion. The expected German breakthrough toward the Meuse never materialized. On the morning of the fourth day, Leonard's platoon faced its most serious challenge. While relocating between positions, they encountered 2 Tiger tanks accompanied by infantry at a forest crossroads. The massive German tanks were refueling from a tanker truck, exactly the type of target Leonard had been seeking, but now guarded by the most formidable armor in the European theater. Leonard assessed the situation quickly. The 2 Tigers were stationary, engines off to conserve fuel. Their main advantage, the devastating 88mm guns, was temporarily negated by their fixed positions. This created a brief window of vulnerability. Using hand signals, Leonard deployed his tanks in a wide semicircle, maintaining the cover of the forest. His plan relied on coordination and overwhelming fire concentrated on specific weak points. "All tanks, target the fuel truck first," Leonard ordered quietly over the radio. "Then tracks and rear engine compartments of the Tigers. Fire on my command, then immediate withdrawal to emergency rally point. No second volleys." Leonard waited until the German infantry had moved away from the tanks, investigating a noise his driver had created by throwing a grenade far to the south. When the moment was perfect, he gave the order, "Fire." 5 Sherman tanks fired simultaneously. The fuel truck erupted in a massive fireball that engulfed 1 Tiger immediately. The second Tiger, slightly farther away, took multiple hits to its track assemblies and engine compartment before its crew could respond. The effect was catastrophic for the Germans. 1 Tiger was consumed by flames, ammunition cooking off inside its turret. The second was immobilized, its tracks shattered and engine damaged beyond field repair. Before the stunned German infantry could organize a response, the American tanks were gone, disappearing into the forest as quickly as they had appeared. By noon, Leonard's platoon had reached their emergency rally point, a small clearing deep in the forest where they could perform essential maintenance and allow the crews a few hours of much-needed rest. Leonard took the opportunity to inspect each tank personally, checking for damage and ensuring critical systems remained operational. Sergeant Williams approached him during this inspection, his expression serious. "Lieutenant, we're running low on ammunition. Maybe 20 rounds per tank remaining." Leonard nodded. "We've accomplished our mission, Williams. The German advance has stalled. It's time to make our way back to our lines." The return journey proved more challenging than their infiltration. German forces, now alert to their presence, had established checkpoints on forest roads and deployed patrols specifically to locate the phantom American tanks. Additionally, recent snowfall had obliterated many of the trails they had used previously. Leonard relied on his natural navigation skills, using stars and terrain features to maintain their westward course. Progress was slow and tense, with the tanks often forced to create new paths through the dense forest. On the 6th day of their operation, with American lines less than 5 miles away, disaster struck. While crossing a small clearing, one of the Sherman tanks threw a track in deep snow. Normally this would be a simple repair, but German aircraft spotted them before they could complete it. Within an hour, German forces began converging on their position. Leonard quickly assessed their options. The damaged tank couldn't be repaired in time, and towing it would slow them to a crawl. "Sergeant Phillips," he addressed the commander of the disabled tank, "remove your 50 caliber machine gun, all ammunition and essential equipment. We're going to disable your vehicle and continue on foot." Phillips understood immediately. "Yes, sir, what about the main gun?" "Remove the breech block and firing pin, we'll take them with us." As Phillips's crew worked to salvage what they could, Leonard deployed the remaining tanks in defensive positions around the clearing. When preparation was complete, Leonard ordered the disabled Sherman's fuel tanks ruptured and a thermite grenade placed on the engine block. The resulting fire ensured nothing useful would fall into German hands. The crew of the disabled tank was distributed among the remaining 4 Shermans, and they resumed their journey westward. Leonard estimated they could reach American lines by nightfall if they maintained their pace. Late in the afternoon, they encountered their final and most dangerous obstacle. A German roadblock had been established directly in their path, consisting of 2 Panther tanks and approximately 50 infantry with anti-tank weapons. The position was well chosen, blocking the only viable route through a particularly steep section of forest. Leonard gathered his tank commanders for a hurried conference. "We can't go around them. The terrain won't allow it. We have to break through." Sergeant Williams studied the German position through binoculars. "Those Panthers have good fields of fire. Frontal assault would be suicide." Leonard nodded, his expression thoughtful. "We're not going to attack their strength. We'll use the last of our smoke rounds to blind their gun sights, then rush the position from multiple angles simultaneously." The plan was desperate, but represented their only chance. Using the last light of day to their advantage, Leonard positioned his tanks at the edge of the forest, approximately 400 yards from the German roadblock. As darkness fell, he gave the order to fire their remaining smoke rounds. White phosphorus shells arced through the air, creating a dense wall of smoke that obscured the German position. Under this cover, the 4 Sherman tanks accelerated to maximum speed, their engines roaring as they charged forward. The Germans, momentarily blinded, fired blindly into the smoke. Most shells passed harmlessly overhead or impacted in the surrounding forest. By the time the smoke began to clear, the American tanks were already among them. Leonard's Brown Betty crashed through the wooden barriers of the roadblock at nearly 30 miles per hour, its machine guns blazing at German infantry. The other Shermans followed, creating chaos in the German position. One of the Panthers managed to traverse its turret in time to fire at Williams' tank. The shell struck a glancing blow, peeling back armor but failing to penetrate. Williams responded by ramming his Sherman directly into the Panther's side, not to damage it but to prevent its turret from rotating toward the other American tanks. Leonard, seeing Williams' predicament, directed his gunner to target the second Panther. At point-blank range, even the Sherman's standard 75mm gun could penetrate the Panther's side armor. The German tank erupted in flames, its ammunition igniting in a catastrophic explosion. With one Panther destroyed and the other temporarily neutralized by Williams' bold maneuver, the German infantry began to withdraw. Leonard ordered all tanks to continue west without stopping, knowing that German reinforcements would soon arrive. Williams managed to disengage from the Panther and follow, his tank's damaged armor shrieking against the hull as he reversed and accelerated after the others. Behind them, German flares illuminated the shattered roadblock. Shortly after 9 that evening, Leonard's battered platoon made radio contact with American forward positions. After careful verification of their identity, they were directed to friendly lines, where an astonished American infantry company welcomed them. Captain Richards, commanding the infantry position, could scarcely believe what he was seeing. "Lieutenant, we were told your entire platoon was lost 6 days ago. 7th Armored has been fighting a holding action against German armor that suddenly seemed to run out of steam." Leonard, exhausted but standing straight, saluted. "Sir, I'm pleased to report that my platoon accomplished its mission behind enemy lines. Request permission to refuel, rearm, and return to our battalion." The impact of Leonard's operation became clear in the days that followed. German communications intercepted by Allied intelligence revealed that major elements of the 2nd Panzer Division had been forced to halt their advance due to critical fuel and ammunition shortages. Their offensive timetable, which relied on rapid movement to reach the Meuse River, had been irreparably disrupted. A German after-action report, captured during the Allied counteroffensive that followed, assessed the situation bluntly. American armored units operating behind our lines created the impression of a major flanking force. The precision of their attacks suggests intimate knowledge of our logistical system. Fuel losses exceeded 40% of divisional reserves, effectively immobilizing our heavy armor. Of particular note was a group of Sherman tanks that repeatedly struck our supply columns before disappearing into terrain we had deemed impassable for armored vehicles. These attacks were primarily responsible for the operational failure of the Ardennes offensive in our sector. What the German analysis couldn't capture was the human element behind this remarkable achievement. A black lieutenant from rural Alabama who had applied the practical wisdom of farming to the challenges of modern warfare. 2 weeks after their return, the 761st Tank Battalion assembled for a special ceremony. General Omar Bradley himself had come to present decorations to Leonard and his men. Standing before the formation, Bradley's speech acknowledged what many already knew. The actions of Lieutenant Jackson and his platoon represent the highest traditions of American military service, Bradley declared. Operating independently behind enemy lines for 6 days, they effectively neutralized a superior enemy force through tactical innovation and extraordinary courage. Their contribution to halting the German Ardennes offensive cannot be overstated. Leonard received the Distinguished Service Cross that day, the nation's second highest military decoration. Each member of his platoon received the Silver Star. The commendations made no mention of race, focusing instead on their achievements. For perhaps the first time in his military service, Leonard was judged solely on his actions rather than his skin color. After the ceremony, Bradley spoke with Leonard privately. "Lieutenant, I've reviewed your tactical assessments. Your understanding of armored warfare is exceptional. Have you considered a career in the military after the war?" Leonard considered the question carefully. "With respect, sir, I believe my place is back home in Alabama. There's a farm that needs attention, and lessons I've learned here that could help my community." Bradley nodded thoughtfully. "The Army will be poorer without you, Lieutenant, but I understand when this war ends, America will need men like you building the peace as much as winning the war." As the Allied forces pushed into Germany in the spring of 1945, Leonard's reputation continued to grow. His tally of German tanks ultimately reached 30, a remarkable achievement considering the technical disadvantages of the Sherman. More importantly, his tactics were adopted across American armored units, saving countless lives by emphasizing maneuver and surprise over frontal engagements. In late April 1945, as American forces approached the Elbe River, Brown Betty led a reconnaissance mission into territory where German resistance remained determined. Entering a small town reportedly clear of enemy forces, Leonard's tank rounded a corner and encountered a Tiger tank at less than 50 yards. Both tanks fired simultaneously. The Tiger's 88mm shell struck Brown Betty's turret directly, penetrating the armor. Leonard, standing in the commander's hatch, was seriously wounded by fragments. Despite their commander's injury, his crew managed to complete their mission, with Williams taking charge and Martinez executing a driving maneuver that positioned them to disable the Tiger with a shot to its vulnerable rear. Leonard spent the final weeks of the European war in a field hospital. When news arrived of Germany's surrender on May 8, 1945, he was recovering from his third surgery. A nurse brought him a newspaper with headlines announcing the victory. "You helped make this happen, Lieutenant," she said kindly. Leonard smiled faintly. "A lot of good men did, ma'am. I'm just grateful to have played my part." By July, Leonard was well enough to return to the United States. The Army offered him an assignment training new tank commanders, but he declined. His thoughts had turned toward home, toward the red soil of Alabama and the family farm where his journey had begun. Before leaving Europe, Leonard visited a German tank repair facility under American control. There, he examined captured Panthers and Tigers with professional curiosity, speaking at length with German mechanics. What struck him most was how these formidable machines, for all their technical sophistication, had ultimately been defeated by American tanks that compensated for their material disadvantages through tactical flexibility and crew initiative. "Your Tigers are magnificent machines," Leonard told a German tank engineer, "but they were designed for a different kind of war than the one we fought." The engineer, a middle-aged man who had spent the war maintaining German armor, nodded soberly. "The best tank is not the one with the biggest gun or thickest armor, but the one that arrives where it's needed, when it's needed. This I think you Americans understood better than we did." Leonard returned to Tuskegee in September 1945. The homecoming was bittersweet. While his family celebrated his safe return and military honors, Alabama remained deeply segregated. The respect he had earned on European battlefields did not translate to equal treatment in his homeland. Yet Leonard refused to become bitter. Using his military savings and the mechanical skills he had honed during the war, he established a small but successful farm equipment repair business, alongside working the family farm. His understanding of machinery, proven in the crucible of combat, made him an invaluable resource for farmers throughout the county. Over time, Leonard's reputation transcended racial boundaries. Farmers, both black and white, sought his expertise. Many were unaware of his wartime achievements, but they recognized his exceptional ability to diagnose and solve mechanical problems. In his own quiet way, Leonard continued the work he had begun in Europe, building bridges through competence and character. In 1948, Leonard received an unexpected visitor. Major James Wilson, now retired from the Army, had made a special trip to Alabama to see his former tank commander. "The Army is changing, Leonard," Wilson told him as they sat on the porch of the Jackson family home. "President Truman has ordered the desegregation of the armed forces. Men like you made that possible, showed what could be achieved when ability matters more than color." Leonard nodded thoughtfully. "It's a start, but we've got a long way to go, both in and out of uniform." Wilson agreed. "That's actually why I'm here. The Army is establishing a new armored warfare school. They want instructors who've proven themselves in combat. Your name came up repeatedly." Leonard looked out over the fields where cotton was ripening in the late summer sun. "I appreciate the offer, Major, but my place is here. There's important work to be done in Alabama, too." Wilson didn't press the issue. Before leaving, he handed Leonard a small package. "The men of the 761st wanted you to have this." Inside was a model of a Sherman tank, meticulously crafted from brass shell casings. Engraved on the base were the words, "To Lieutenant Leonard Jackson, who taught us that it's not the machine but the man inside that makes the difference." In the decades that followed, Leonard Jackson became a pillar of his community. He expanded his business, eventually employing dozens of people and providing opportunities regardless of race. He married his childhood sweetheart, Elizabeth, and they raised 4 children who all attended college, an achievement that gave Leonard particular pride. When the civil rights movement gained momentum in the 1960s, Leonard supported it quietly but effectively, using his standing in the community to advocate for change. He never spoke publicly about his wartime experiences, preferring to let his daily actions demonstrate his character. It wasn't until 1978, when a military historian researching African-American contributions during World War II tracked him down, that Leonard's story reached a wider audience. The resulting book, The Black Ghost: How a Farmer's Son Outfoxed the German Panzer Divisions, became an important addition to the military historical record. In 1994, nearly 50 years after the Battle of the Bulge, Leonard received a letter from Germany. It was from Hans Müller, a former Panzer commander who had faced American tanks during the Ardennes offensive. "For many years," Müller wrote, "I have wondered about the American tank unit that appeared behind our lines in December 1944. They struck with such precision that we believed we were facing a full battalion. Only recently, upon reading a historical account, did I learn the truth, that it was merely 5 tanks led by a brilliant young officer. I wish to express my respect for your skill and courage, even though we were adversaries. In the brotherhood of soldiers, such qualities transcend national uniforms." Leonard, by then in his 70s, wrote back, initiating a correspondence that continued until Müller's death several years later. Their exchange reflected how former enemies could find common ground in mutual respect for professional ability and shared hardship. Leonard Jackson passed away peacefully in 2002, surrounded by his family. His funeral was attended by hundreds, including several elderly men who had served under his command nearly 60 years earlier. A military honor guard provided a final salute, and his former gunner, David Williams, spoke eloquently of their wartime experiences. "Leonard never talked much about what he accomplished," Williams said, "but those of us who served with him knew. He changed how America fought the war, and he changed how many of us thought about race. He showed that innovation and determination could overcome both technical disadvantages and social prejudices. Most importantly, he brought us home when conventional wisdom said what we attempted was impossible." Today, Leonard Jackson's story is taught at the United States Army Armor School as an example of tactical innovation and leadership. His techniques for employing tanks, emphasizing mobility, surprise, and exploitation of terrain, remain relevant in modern armored doctrine. Military historians rank him among the most effective tank commanders of World War II, noting that his 30 confirmed tank destruction-ons were achieved without the technical advantages enjoyed by German tank aces. But perhaps Leonard's most enduring legacy lies not in his military achievements, but in how he lived after the war. He returned to a society that still denied him full citizenship, and responded not with bitterness, but with the same determination and excellence that had characterized his military service. Through quiet dignity and demonstrated competence, he helped change his community just as he had once changed tank warfare. Not through confrontation, but by finding paths where others saw only obstacles. The modest farm where Leonard Jackson began and ended his journey now houses a small museum dedicated to the 761st Tank Battalion and African American service during World War II. Among the artifacts displayed is his battered tanker's helmet, the Distinguished Service Cross he was awarded, and a jar of red Alabama soil that traveled with him throughout the European campaign, a reminder of what he was fighting for. Visitors to the museum often remark on the apparent contradiction, how a young man with limited formal education, facing both technical disadvantages and social prejudice, could achieve such remarkable success against the vaunted German armored forces. The answer lies in Leonard's own words, recorded in an interview shortly before his death. Growing up on a farm, you learn that there's always more than one way to solve a problem. When the tractor breaks down, you either fix it with what you have, or you find another way to get the job done. The Germans built magnificent tanks, but they expected us to fight by their rules. I just applied some farm sense to the problem. Find the indirect approach. Use the land to your advantage. Understand that even the most powerful machine has limitations. He paused then, reflecting on lessons that applied far beyond the battlefield. And remember that determination can overcome almost any obstacle, mechanical or human. That's not just true in war, it's true in life. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.